Have you ever walked into a room and just felt your whole mood shift? Or, how some city streets feel exciting and full of life while others are just confusing and draining? Well, it turns out there's this powerful hidden force at play, an unseen architect that's constantly shaping our thoughts and our feelings. And today, we're going to pull back that curtain and see exactly how it works. I mean, really think about it for a second. Why does a cramped, windowless office feel so exhausting, but a simple walk in the park can totally recharge you? Or why can you navigate one city like the back of your hand, but feel completely and totally lost in another? These feelings, they're not random. They are the result of this constant conversation happening between you and your surroundings. And the key to understanding this whole conversation is this amazing field called environmental psychology. It's all about unpacking the relationship between us, people, and our physical world. And what it shows us is that the world around us isn't just some passive backdrop to our lives. No, it's an active participant. So, let's talk about this invisible architect. It is everywhere, constantly designing our experiences, usually without us even noticing. We don't really think twice about the height of a ceiling or the way a hallway curves, but the psychological impact? It is constant. We tend to see our environment as just there. It's just the stuff around us. But what environmental psychology shows us is that every single design choice, from the curve of that hallway to the material on a park bench, is sending a message to our brain. And it's influencing how we behave and how we feel in these really subtle but incredibly powerful ways. All right, let's start with the psychology of space itself. We're going to zoom right in on how the shapes and the structures immediately around you are constantly, quietly training your brain on how to see the world. And I mean that literally. The built environment you grow up in can fundamentally wire your brain's perceptual system. It can actually determine what you see and what you don't. And there is a classic study that just illustrates this brilliantly. Okay, so take a look at this. Researchers showed a specific optical illusion to different groups of children. Now, the kids from urban areas, both European and Zulu, were easily fooled by it. And why is that? Well, because their world is full of rectangular buildings, right angles, and corners. Their brains had been trained to expect those shapes. But the Zulu children from rural areas who grew up around round huts and more organic shapes, they saw the illusion for what it really was. Their brains just weren't wired to be fooled by it. How wild is that? And this brings us to a really crucial point. If our environment has such a deep impact on us, what happens when it's designed without our psychology in mind? This quote from sociologist Serge Bouteline just nails the problem perfectly. So much of our modern world isn't actually built for how our minds work. Let's look at a few examples you might even recognize. You've got those featureless, identical, high-rise buildings that can make it really hard for people to form a sense of identity or community. Or think about long, monotonous hospital corridors. They can actually be really disorienting and stressful, especially for patients. And yet, the super popular open-plan office? Turns out, despite the best intentions, studies show it often just leads to more distractions and less focus. Okay, so let's zoom out. We've talked about buildings, now let's go to the scale of an entire city. Because just as we live in a physical city, we all carry a version of it inside our own heads. Right, we all get around using what psychologists call a cognitive map. Think of it like your internal GPS. But here's the thing, it's not a perfect satellite image, not at all. It's more like a hand-drawn sketch, It gets warped and highlighted by your personal experiences. The places you love might seem bigger, the routes you always take are crystal clear, and entire sections of the city you never go to, they might just be complete blanks. Now, it turns out some cities are way easier for our brains to map than others. The urban planner Kevin Lynch did this famous study, and he found that a city like Boston was highly legible. People who lived there could easily form a clear mental picture of it. But Jersey City, at the time, was illegible. Residents found it confusing, hard to structure in their minds. One person even said it felt like being in the middle of a swamp. And that feeling of being lost, that's not a personal failing, it's a design problem. So what makes a city easy to read, or legible? Well, Lynch identified 5 key things that you can probably recognize in your own town. You've got paths, the streets you walk down, edges like a riverfront or a big wall, districts, like a theater district or a market quarter, nodes, which are those busy intersections or squares, and of course, landmarks. When these things all work together, we feel secure, we feel at home. When they don't, we feel lost. So this is all fascinating, right? But what's the point? If we know what makes a space confusing or stressful, how do we use that knowledge to actually fix things? Well, this isn't just theory. It actually gives us a blueprint for building a better world. Let's look at how that works.
Okay, so back in the mid 20th century, a lot of massive public housing projects were built with really good intentions, but many of them became hotspots for crime and social breakdown. And it turned out the design itself was a huge part of the problem. You had anonymous lobbies, confusing hallways, unsupervised public areas. They basically created environments where crime could just thrive.
So the solution came from applying environmental psychology. An architect named Oscar Newman developed his theory of defensible space. And the idea is actually simple, but it's totally revolutionary. Design buildings so that residents feel a sense of ownership over the shared spaces, and so they can naturally see what's happening around them. This natural surveillance, just eyes on the street, creates this incredibly powerful deterrent to crime. And we see this exact same principle at work in other places, like university dorms. I mean, just look at the difference here in satisfaction levels. Students in smaller, low-rise buildings feel a sense of community. It's their defensible space, while students in these massive, anonymous high-rises can feel really isolated. The architecture itself is actively building or breaking social bonds. But hey, design failures aren't just about these big picture things like crime or social connection. Sometimes they just create pure, frustrating confusion. A classic example: trying to navigate a subway system where the map totally ignores how our minds actually work. Get this, in a 1976 study, researchers asked 20 newcomers to the city to plan 4 simple trips using the official New York City subway map. The number of people who could actually do it successfully? 0. Not 1. The map was geographically perfect, but for a human brain trying to get from A to B, it was psychologically useless, a complete design failure. The solution to all of these problems, from confusing maps to isolating buildings to stressful offices, it's all the same. It's a blueprint we can call human-centered design. And it's simple, really. It just means we stop designing for abstract space and we start designing for the real, complex, and fascinating ways our minds actually experience the world. So the big takeaway here is this: the spaces we live in are not neutral. They are constantly, actively shaping us. But, and this is the hopeful part, by understanding this hidden influence, we get the power to shape them back. We can move from just being passive subjects to becoming active co-creators of our world. So that leaves us with a final and, I think, pretty powerful question. The next time you walk down your street, maybe you'll see it a little differently. Not just as a bunch of buildings, but as a series of choices that someone made. Which leads us to ask ourselves, if this environment is shaping us, how can we start shaping it for the better?